Hey guys, tonight we're diving headfirst into a world where water wasn't just a basic necessity, but a pulsating, gurgling heart of an empire, ancient Rome. Imagine, if you will, the oppressive summer heat of Rome. A sun so intense it feels like it's trying to bake the very sweat from your skin. You're trudging through dusty, crowded streets, the air thick with the scent of humanity, charcoal, smoke, and, well, probably a bit of unwashed toga. Your throat feels like sandpaper, every breath a dry rasp. Then you hear it, a gentle gurgle, then a steady rush, growing louder with each weary step. You turn a corner, and there it is, a magnificent fountain, sparkling in the sunlight, sending cool spray into the humid air. Water, gloriously, impossibly clear, gushes from ornate spouts, splashing into a basin where people are already cupping their hands, drinking deeply, splashing their faces. The relief washes over you, a physical sensation almost as powerful as the thirst itself. This wasn't just a drink, it was life, luxury, and a constant, reassuring presence. Now, imagine trying to survive in a city of over 1 million people without a consistent, clean water supply. No bottled water, no convenient taps in your apartment, not even a well in every courtyard. You probably wouldn't survive this, let's be honest. Modern life has spoiled us rotten, hasn't it? We turn on a faucet and forget the miracle of it. But for the ancient Romans, the public fountain was the bedrock of their existence, the pulsating artery that nourished their sprawling urban beast. It wasn't merely utilitarian, it was central to their culture, their status, their very identity. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always wild to think about us all connecting across different corners of the globe, isn't it? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. We're going back, way back, to a time before your kitchen tap was even a glimmer in an inventor's eye, to the very genesis of Rome's watery obsession. Our story, in many ways, begins with a deep, pressing thirst. For centuries, the early Romans, much like any nascent settlement, relied on the Tiber River, local springs, and rainwater cisterns. Sounds quaint, doesn't it? A bit rustic. But as Rome swelled from a small collection of huts on 7 hills into a burgeoning city-state, this rudimentary water supply became woefully inadequate. You can almost hear the collective groan of 1 million thirsty Romans, can't you? Another dry spell. Are we serious right now? The very idea of a reliable, consistent water source flowing into the heart of their city must have felt like a dream, a whisper of possibility that grew into a roaring necessity. And so, the concept of the aqueduct was born, a monument to Roman ingenuity, a colossal undertaking that would redefine urban living for centuries to come. This wasn't just about bringing water. It was about shaping the very fabric of their society, allowing it to expand, to flourish, to truly become an empire. Historians still argue whether the primary motivation for the earliest aqueducts was public health, strategic military supply, or simply the immense practical need of a rapidly growing population. Perhaps it was a glorious cocktail of all three, seasoned with a dash of Roman ambition. The first major Roman aqueduct, the Aqua Appia, completed in 312 BC, was largely underground, a secretive serpent of stone winding its way into the city. It was practical, certainly, but hardly the grand, arching spectacle we often associate with Roman waterworks. Imagine the initial reaction. Oh cool, water, where is it? But it set a precedent, a testament to what was achievable. Then came the Anio Vetus, built about 40 years later, and still, mostly out of sight, out of mind. These early aqueducts were like the shy, quiet siblings of the family. They got the job done, but they weren't exactly boasting about it. But the real game changer, the one that truly captured the Roman imagination and set the stage for their love affair with public fountains, was the Aqua Marcia, constructed in 144 BC. This was the show-off, the superstar aqueduct. It was longer, higher, and delivered water of an unparalleled purity and coolness. For the first time, large sections of an aqueduct marched proudly across. The landscape on massive arches, a visible testament to Roman power and engineering prowess. You can almost hear the oohs and ahs from the Roman populace as they gazed upon this new marvel, stretching across the Campania. Look at that. It's like a giant stone rainbow bringing us water. Who needs rain when you have engineering? The Aqua Marcia wasn't just a technical marvel, it was a psychological one. It solidified the idea that Rome could command nature, bend the very rivers to its will. This wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about dominion. This plentiful, fresh water meant more than just quenching thirst. It meant public baths could expand, offering a level of hygiene and social interaction previously unimagined. It meant public latrines could be flushed, reducing disease though, let's be honest. Roman sanitation still had its moments. Don't ask about the communal sponge on a stick. And, crucially for our story, it meant a constant, abundant supply for the burgeoning network of public fountains. These aren't your dinky little garden sprinklers we're talking about. These were often grand, monumental structures, artistic statements in their own right, and they were everywhere. Imagine a city where every few blocks you encountered a beautifully carved marble basin, constantly overflowing with fresh, cool water. It was a civic amenity that transcended class. Whether you were a senator in a pristine toga or a humble plebeian selling bread, the public fountain was there for you. It was democratic in its utility, yet often aristocratic in its design. A delightful paradox, wouldn't you say? The sheer scale of this undertaking is almost mind-boggling. Think about the planning, the surveying, the sheer manual labor involved in building these aqueducts across miles of varied terrain. They had to maintain a precise, gentle gradient for gravity to do its work, navigating hills, valleys, and even other structures. It's like trying to get a perfectly straight line of dominoes to fall across an entire country. Only the dominoes are made of tons of stone, and you're doing it with rudimentary tools and a lot of grit. The Roman engineers, the Aquilagers, were unsung heroes, mathematical wizards with chisels. They weren't just building pipes, they were sculpting the very future of their city. So, the arrival of abundant clean water via these architectural masterpieces transformed Rome from a thriving but often parched city into a truly magnificent metropolis. The public fountain, then, was the sparkling jewel at the end of this engineering triumph. It wasn't just a tap, it was a destination, a meeting point, a place of refreshment and respite, woven into the very fabric of Roman daily life. They loved them because they were, quite simply, miraculous. So, you've just witnessed the magic of the Aqua Marcia, a veritable river of pure mountain spring water now coursing into Rome. But getting the water to the city was only half the battle, wasn't it? Once it arrived, it needed to be managed, distributed, and maintained day in and day out. This wasn't a one-and-done engineering project. It was a living, breathing, constantly demanding system, much like your Wi-Fi router, but way more prone to Roman-era equivalent of buffering. Imagine, for a moment, the sheer logistics involved. We're talking about dozens of aqueducts eventually, crisscrossing the landscape, some stretching for over 50 miles. This wasn't just a few big pipes. It was an intricate network, a circulatory system for the entire city. And unlike our modern pressurized systems, Roman aqueducts relied almost entirely on gravity. This meant a continuous, precise, gentle, downward slope from the distant mountain springs all the way into the urban core. Think of it like a giant, meticulously constructed water slide, but one that has to work perfectly for centuries. Get the slope wrong by even a tiny fraction, and the water either sits stagnant or rushes down with destructive force, taking your carefully laid pipes with it. The daily operation of this colossal system was overseen by a dedicated corps of public officials and, more importantly, a vast army of laborers. At the head of this watery bureaucracy was the Curator Aquarum, the water commissioner. This was a seriously important gig, often held by someone of senatorial rank. Imagine being in charge of the water for 1 million people. Talk about job security, as long as the water kept flowing. If it stopped, you probably had some very unhappy Romans on your hands, and unhappy Romans tended to express their displeasure rather enthusiastically. Historians still argue whether the Curator Aquarum's role was more about technical oversight or political power projection. Given Rome's love of both, it was probably a potent mix of the two. Below the Curator Aquarum was a sizable workforce known as the Familia Aquaria. These weren't just a handful of guys with wrenches. We're talking hundreds, even thousands, of slaves and freedmen, organized into teams, each with their specific tasks. Picture them, some trudging along the aqueduct channels, constantly checking for leaks, cracks, or blockages. It's not glamorous work, is it? More like being a constantly vigilant, very hydrated snail. Others were responsible for clearing debris that might have fallen into the channel's leaves, branches. Rogue squirrels, one can only imagine the complaints about squirrel-flavored water. And remember, these channels weren't always covered, especially in rural areas, making them prime targets for all sorts of natural incursions. Then there were the water gatekeepers, stationed at various points along the distribution network. Think of them as the ancient Roman equivalent of your apartment buildings, super, but with far more power over your daily hydration. They controlled the flow of water into different districts, sometimes diverting supplies for maintenance or to prioritize certain areas. This control, naturally, came with a fair bit of responsibility and, let's be honest, probably a bit of opportunity for graft. A little extra denarii might just ensure your neighborhood fountain ran a little stronger, a little longer. Nobody's perfect, right? But the real unsung heroes, or perhaps anti-heroes, of daily aqueduct life were the punctuari, literally tappers. These were the guys responsible for making connections from the main aqueduct lines to private homes, villas, and public baths. Now, this was where things got a bit dicey. While the public fountains were free and abundant, obtaining a private water supply from the aqueduct required a special grant from the emperor or the senate, and often a hefty fee. The punctuari were supposed to ensure these connections were legal and properly sized, using standardized bronze nozzles or calices to regulate the flow. However, human nature being what it is, illicit tapping was rampant. Imagine the underground network of unauthorized hoses and pipes, siphoning off water from the public supply. It was the ancient Roman equivalent of illegal cable boxes, only with significantly higher stakes for public health. The famous Roman engineer Sextus Julius Frontinus, who served as curator aquarum in the late 1st century AD, wrote extensively about these abuses. He complained about fraudulent calices being used, smaller ones to pay less for more water, or larger ones to steal more water than paid for, and entire extra pipes being laid without permission. He even detailed how some people would run their own pipes inside the official ones, like a water-guzzling Russian doll. It's a testament to the ingenuity of the human spirit, even when that spirit is a bit on the larcenous side. Frontinus, bless his meticulous heart, tried his best to crack down on these practices, but it was an uphill battle against deeply entrenched habits. Beyond the daily checks and balances, there was the ongoing task of maintenance and repair. Aqueducts, despite their sturdy construction, were susceptible to damage. Earthquakes, floods, rockfalls, even simple wear and tear from centuries of flowing water could cause cracks, blockages, or collapses. When this happened, repairs were immediate and vital. Teams would be dispatched, often working quickly to divert water and mend the breach. This could involve rebuilding entire sections of masonry, clearing out massive calcification deposits, like the world's most stubborn limescale, or replacing damaged lead pipes. It was a constant war against entropy. The water itself, despite its initial purity, required some management. Settling tanks, known as castella, were built at various points along the aqueduct and within the city. These tanks allowed sediment and impurities to settle out of the water before it was distributed to the fountains and baths. Think of them as ancient Roman water filters, albeit very large and very slow ones. The castella also served as distribution hubs with multiple outlets, directing water to different parts of the city. The larger ones, the Castella Divisorum, were often monumental structures themselves, decorated with columns and statues, reminding everyone of the grandeur of Rome's water system. Even the public fountains required constant attention. Basins would need cleaning, spouts would get clogged, and the surrounding pavement would need repair from the constant splashing and foot traffic. It was a never-ending cycle of vigilance and labor, ensuring that the refreshing flow of water remained uninterrupted. You can almost hear the grumpy Roman homeowner complaining to his neighbor, "My fountain's running a bit weak today." Probably those punctuary again, up to their old tricks. The sheer scale of this daily operation speaks volumes about how deeply ingrained the public water system was in Roman life. It wasn't just a convenience. It was a fundamental pillar of their urban existence, a testament to their administrative capacity, and, frankly, a bit of a marvel. Every time you enjoyed a cool drink from a public fountain or luxuriated in the warm waters of the baths, you were, in a way, benefiting from the tireless, often unseen, work of thousands of individuals who kept Rome's watery heart beating. It's almost enough to make you appreciate your plumbing a little more, isn't it? Almost. Section 3, you've just seen the colossal effort it took to get water flowing into Rome, and the constant vigilance required to keep it there. But once that fresh, cool stream gurgled from the aqueduct and into the city's distribution network, what happened next? For the Romans, water wasn't merely a commodity. It was a canvas, a statement, and a dazzling display of status and splendor. This is where the public fountain truly blossomed, transforming from a simple spout into a focal point of urban beauty and a powerful symbol of civic pride. Imagine stepping into a Roman piazza. You're not just looking for a place to refill your Waterskin, you're looking for a spectacle. The public fountain was often the architectural crown jewel of its neighborhood, a grand performance in stone and water. We're not talking about a modest drinking tap tucked away in a corner. Oh no. These were often elaborate, multi-tiered structures, adorned with sculptures, intricate carvings, and sometimes even functioning as miniature grottos. Think of them as the ancient Roman equivalent of a public art installation designed to awe and inspire while also quenching your thirst. The sheer artistry involved was breathtaking. Imagine the Nympha, for instance. These weren't just fountains. They were monumental, semicircular or rectangular structures, often built into hillsides or walls, designed to evoke natural grottos or grottos, sacred to nymphs. They often featured multiple spouts, cascading water over carefully sculpted rocks and statues of mythological figures. You might find a reclining river god, an elegant nymph, or perhaps a playful satyr, all seemingly brought to life by the constantly moving water. It was a fusion of architecture, sculpture, and hydraulics, a true testament to Roman aesthetic sensibilities. And let's be honest, standing next to one of these on a hot day, feeling the cool mist, you'd probably forget all about your mundane errands for a moment. Oh, is that a giant marble fish spitting water? Splendid. These fountains weren't just pretty faces, though. Their grandeur was a deliberate expression of wealth and power. The construction of a magnificent public fountain was often funded by emperors, wealthy senators, or successful generals. Why? Because it was a highly visible, undeniably tangible gift to the populace. Think of it as a very elaborate, very public thank you note to the citizens. By commissioning such a structure, a patron wasn't just providing water. They were broadcasting their generosity, their devotion to the city, and their immense personal resources. Look what I, Emperor Fancy Pants, have given you. Aren't I magnificent? Now, drink up. It was a savvy move, a clear way to curry favor and solidify one's standing in the cutthroat world of Roman politics. Take, for example, the Aqua Virgo in Rome, which, incidentally, still feeds the Trevi Fountain today. When it was built in 19 BC, Agrippa, Emperor Augustus's right-hand man and a serial public benefactor, ensured it ended in a magnificent nymphaeum. This wasn't just functional. It was a statement about Augustus's new golden age, a testament to the peace and prosperity he brought. The water itself was celebrated, almost personified, as a gift from the gods and from the benevolent ruler. It's a bit like someone gifting their city a public park, but the park also magically dispenses free, delicious beverages. Quite the upgrade. The sheer number of these fountains was also a display of Roman might. By the 4th century AD, Rome boasted an astonishing number of public fountains. Some estimates put it at over 1,000, including smaller basins. Imagine a city where water gushed constantly from 1,000 different points. The sound alone would have been incredible. A constant murmur and splash that would have permeated the urban soundscape, especially in a city without modern traffic noise. This wasn't just efficient, it was extravagant. It spoke volumes about Rome's ability to harness resources, to command engineering, and to provide for its massive population in a way few other ancient cities could even dream of. Historians still argue whether the proliferation of smaller public spouts was a purely pragmatic response to population density or a further extension of civic beautification initiatives. Probably a bit of both, with a generous helping of because we can. Moreover, the fountains often served as commemorative monuments. A victorious general might dedicate a new fountain to celebrate his triumph, ensuring his name and legacy were forever linked with a vital public utility. Imagine a general returning from a successful campaign, not just with spoils of war, but with the gift of eternal refreshment for his city. I brought back gold, slaves, and a really fantastic new water feature for your convenience. It was a subtle yet powerful form of propaganda, reminding everyone of the source of their good fortune. Even smaller, less grand fountains added to the overall sense of abundance and civic care. These might be simpler basins, often fed by secondary pipes from the main distribution tanks, but they were no less appreciated. They dotted every district, ensuring that no citizen was ever too far from a fresh drink or a quick splash to cool off. They were egalitarian in access, but still contributed to the overarching narrative of Roman supremacy and organizational genius. So, while the Aqua Marcia was a triumph of engineering, the magnificent public fountains were a triumph of Roman spirit. They transformed a basic necessity into a source of pride, a symbol of power, and an ever-present reminder of Rome's enduring greatness. They literally brought life and beauty to the dusty streets, transforming the city into a vibrant, gurgling metropolis where water wasn't just consumed, it was celebrated. And honestly, who wouldn't love that? It's far more appealing than a communal well, isn't it? Much less chance of falling in. Section 4. You've seen how the fountains were grand statements of power and artistry, gleaming jewels in the Roman urban crown. But let's strip away the marble and the mythological figures for a moment and get down to the gritty, everyday reality. Beyond the splendor and the political posturing, the most fundamental reason ancient Romans loved their public fountains so much was pure, unadulterated practicality. These fountains weren't just pretty, they were absolutely indispensable for the daily life and hygiene of the vast majority of Rome's teeming population. Imagine, again, that bustling Roman city. Your typical Roman citizen, the vast majority living in multi-story apartment blocks called insulae, didn't have plumbing in their homes. Let that sink in for a moment. No running water in your kitchen, no private bathroom with a flush toilet, unless you were obscenely wealthy, and even then, it was rare. So, if you needed water for cooking, cleaning, or, well, drinking, where did you go? The public fountain. It was the ancient Roman equivalent of your kitchen tap, your laundry room, and your water cooler, all rolled into one communal, constantly flowing marvel. You'd wake up, probably with the Roman sun streaming through a small window, and one of your first tasks would be a trip to the nearest fountain. Picture yourself, jug or amphora in hand, navigating the narrow, often crowded streets. You'd join a steady stream of people, all with the same mission, to collect the day's water supply. It was a daily ritual, as ingrained as morning coffee is for us. Perhaps you'd chat with neighbors, exchange a bit of gossip, or simply enjoy the cool air and the soothing sound of the gushing water. It wasn't just a chore. It was a communal hub, a place where the rhythms of daily life played out. Morning, Marcus. Your jug looks a bit chipped there, mate. Did you drop it again? This was the primary source of potable water for literally hundreds of thousands of Romans. The water from the aqueducts was generally clean and fresh, unlike often contaminated river water or stagnant well water. This significantly improved public health, reducing waterborne diseases that plagued many other ancient cities. Think of the cholera outbreaks that ravaged European cities centuries later, or the constant threat of dysentery. Rome, thanks to its aqueducts and fountains, had a distinct advantage. It's almost as if they instinctively understood the importance of sanitation long before germ theory was even a twinkle in anyone's eye. Or maybe they just preferred not to die of stomach bugs. Practicality, remember. Beyond drinking and cooking, these fountains were crucial for daily hygiene. While the wealthy might have had private baths, and public baths were available for everyone, we'll get to those later, the fountains provided a quick and accessible way to wash hands, rinse food, or even quickly splash one's face on a hot day. Imagine preparing a meal without a nearby faucet. You'd need to fetch water to wash your vegetables, to clean your cooking pots, to dilute your garum fish sauce. Don't ask. The public fountain was the answer to all these small but vital domestic needs. It was the ultimate multi-purpose utility. Animals too benefited from these public watering holes. While dedicated troughs existed, you'd often see horses, mules, and even the occasional stray dog quenching their thirst at the larger fountain basins. It was a constant flurry of activity, a microcosm of Roman life revolving around these precious water sources. And yes, sometimes it probably got a bit chaotic, with jostling crowds and impatient animals. But it was a necessary chaos. Even businesses relied heavily on the public fountains. Laundries, known as fulinicae, needed vast quantities of water for washing clothes. While some might have had direct pipes, many would have relied on repeated trips to the public fountains, hauling heavy buckets back to their establishments. Similarly, street vendors selling fruit or vegetables would use fountain water to keep their produce fresh and appealing. Think of the sheer labor involved in keeping a city of 1 million people fed, clothed, and hydrated, all facilitated by these ubiquitous water points. It really makes you appreciate your washing machine, doesn't it? No need to haul your sweaty tunics down to the local fountain. The public fountains also served as informal fire hydrants, while not designed specifically for firefighting. The constant availability of large volumes of water made them invaluable in a city constantly at risk of devastating fires. When a blaze broke out in one of the densely packed insulae, bucket brigades would quickly form, drawing water from the nearest fountain. It was a crude but often effective method of containment, highlighting another vital, if perhaps less glamorous, practical application of the public water system. Historians still argue whether the primary concern for fire suppression was always considered in the initial placement and design of public fountains, or if it was an advantageous byproduct of the system's overall abundance. Given Rome's history with fires, it was likely a welcome bonus. So, while the emperors and patricians might have enjoyed the aesthetic grandeur, for the vast majority of Romans, the public fountain was quite simply the lifeline of their daily existence. It enabled cooking, cleaning, personal hygiene, and even fire safety, all without the convenience of modern plumbing. It transformed mere survival into a more comfortable, healthier, and perhaps even a slightly more enjoyable existence. They loved their public fountains not just for their beauty, but because without them, life in Rome would have been infinitely harder, smellier, and considerably more thirsty. It was a truly transformative piece of infrastructure, making urban life on such a grand scale even possible. Section 5, we've discussed the sheer practical necessity of the public fountains, how they quenched the thirst and cleaned the linen of an entire city. But let's zoom out a bit, beyond the individual jug and bucket, to appreciate the truly mind-boggling feat that made all of this possible. The engineering wonders that ensured water flowed consistently, day in and day out, across miles of varied terrain and right into those magnificent basins. This wasn't just about digging a ditch. This was applied genius, a level of hydrological understanding that still impresses engineers today. Imagine, if you will, the challenge. You need to transport water from a distant spring, often many miles away in the hills, all the way to a bustling city, ensuring a continuous, controlled flow, entirely reliant on gravity. No pumps, no fancy modern pipes with immense pressure, just stone, concrete, lead, and an unparalleled understanding of topography and gradients. It's like trying to perfectly angle a giant ramp for a marble that has to travel for hours without ever speeding up too much or getting stuck. This is where the Roman engineers truly shone, earning their reputation as masters of construction. Their primary tool, the bedrock of their success, was an obsessive attention to gradient. We're talking about an incredibly subtle, precise slope that allowed water to flow continuously without eroding the channels or stagnating. The ideal gradient was often just a few feet per mile, sometimes even less. Imagine trying to achieve that accuracy across dozens of miles using rudimentary surveying tools, like the chorobates, a long wooden frame with plumb lines and a water channel, and the groma, a cross-shaped surveying instrument. It required an uncanny eye for the landscape and an almost fanatical dedication to precision. One tiny mistake and miles of work could be rendered useless. It makes your high school geometry class look like child's play, doesn't it? The aqueduct channels themselves, known as specus, were meticulously constructed. They were typically lined with waterproof concrete, a Roman invention that was remarkably durable and, crucially, allowed them to create seamless, leak-proof conduits. This concrete, made from volcanic ash pozzolana, lime, and aggregate, could even set underwater, a revolutionary innovation that allowed them to build bridges and foundations in challenging environments. The inside of the speakers was often coated with a reddish waterproof plaster called opus signinum, adding another layer of defense against leaks and ensuring purity. Think of it as the ultimate in ancient Roman waterproofing technology, better than any leaky faucet in your bathroom now. When the aqueduct encountered a valley or low-lying area, the Romans had a few ingenious solutions. The most iconic, of course, are the magnificent arches. These wasn't just for show. They were incredibly efficient structures for spanning wide gaps while minimizing the use of materials. The strength of the arch, distributing weight outwards and downwards, allowed them to build towering structures that could support the heavy water channel above. The Pont du Gard in France, a stunning three-tiered example, stands as a testament to this architectural brilliance. Imagine the sheer organizational effort to quarry, transport, and precisely place these enormous stone blocks without cranes or modern machinery. It was pure muscle, ingenuity, and a lot of very patient planning. For deeper, narrower valleys, they sometimes employed inverted siphons. This was a more complex and less common solution, involving a large, heavy-duty lead pipe, more on lead. Later, that would descend into a valley, cross the bottom, and then rise again on the other side due to the pressure of the water. While technically impressive, these siphons were expensive to build and maintain, and the extreme pressure on the pipes often led to leaks. So, while they demonstrated Roman engineering prowess, the arch was almost always the preferred solution. Where possible, historians still debate whether the Roman reluctance to use more siphons was due to the cost, the material limitations of lead, or simply their mastery of arch construction making it a more reliable choice. Probably a bit of all three, with a healthy dose of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Once the water reached the city, The distribution system itself was a marvel of practicality. The main aqueduct line would feed into a primary castellum, a large settling tank and distribution hub, often located on a high point. From here, the water was typically divided into three main branches: one for public fountains, one for public baths, and one for private users, though this last category often received a secondary supply after the public amenities were satisfied. This prioritization speaks volumes about Roman civic values: public good first, then private luxury. The water was then channeled through a network of smaller lead or terracotta pipes, known as fistula, snaking their way beneath the city streets. These pipes, often laid in trenches, fed directly into the public fountains, baths, and private residences. The use of lead was problematic, as we'll discuss, but for the Romans, it was incredibly malleable and durable, easy to work with. For intricate plumbing to control the flow and pressure, the Romans used a system of valves and sluice gates. While not as sophisticated as modern pressure regulators, these allowed engineers to divert water for maintenance or to temporarily increase flow to certain areas during times of high demand. They even had rudimentary overflow systems, ensuring that excess water didn't cause damage, often diverting it into the city's extensive sewer system, the Cloaca Maxima. So, even the wastewater served a purpose, carrying away refuse and helping to keep the city cleaner. The sheer scale of the labor involved in these projects is often overlooked. We're talking about tens of thousands of skilled and unskilled laborers, slaves and soldiers working for years, sometimes decades, on a single aqueduct. Imagine the coordination, the logistics of feeding and housing these enormous workforces, quarrying the stone, manufacturing the concrete, laying the pipes. It was a logistical marvel on par with the engineering itself. So when you stood by a Roman public fountain, drinking that cool, pure water, you weren't just benefiting from a convenient tap. You were witnessing the culmination of centuries of accumulated engineering knowledge, meticulous planning, and an almost unbelievable dedication to precision and scale. It was a testament to human ingenuity, a demonstration of how a civilization, through collective effort and brilliant minds, could literally bend nature to its will. It makes you wonder what kind of amazing things we could build today if we focused that much concentrated effort on a single, vital resource, doesn't it? Perhaps we'd have self-filling bathtubs that also make toast. One can dream. Section 6. We've marveled at the Roman ingenuity that brought water into the city and distributed it with incredible efficiency. But there's a rather uncomfortable truth lurking beneath the surface of all that engineering brilliance. A shadow in the crystal clear water, the widespread use of lead in their plumbing. This isn't exactly a bedtime story filled with warm fuzzies, but it's a crucial piece of the puzzle if we're truly understanding Roman water systems. We're stepping into the murky waters of the lead pipe debate. Imagine you're a Roman plumber or a plumbarius. Your primary material for making pipes, connectors, and even the nozzles for fountains and private connections is lead. Why lead? Well, it's incredibly versatile. It's soft, easy to mold and shape, and relatively resistant to corrosion from water. You can melt it down and cast it into sheets, then bend and solder those sheets into pipes of various sizes. It was, in short, a fantastic material for the job, given the technological limitations of the time. Think of it as the plastic of the ancient world, cheap, abundant, and surprisingly easy to work with. What could possibly go wrong? A lot, as it turns out. We, with our modern understanding of toxicology, know that lead is a neurotoxin. Chronic exposure, even to small amounts, can lead to a host of debilitating health problems, including cognitive impairment, kidney damage, anemia, and reproductive issues. Not exactly ideal for a thriving empire, is it? It's like discovering your favorite ancient Roman snack was actually tiny, delicious poisoned berries. Oops. So, the big question that has plagued historians and scientists for decades is, how much did Roman lead plumbing actually affect their health? This is where the debate part really kicks in, and it's a fascinating, if somewhat grim, academic wrestling match. On one side, you have scholars who argue that widespread lead poisoning, or plumbism, was a significant factor in the decline of the Roman Empire, particularly affecting the elite who had more access to private lead pipes and therefore potentially higher exposure. The theory goes that the ruling class, constantly exposed to lead through their water, wine, which was often sweetened and preserved in lead pots, and even lead-based cosmetics, suffered from reduced fertility, increased rates of mental illness, and a general decline in intellectual capacity, ultimately contributing to the empire's weakening. It's a compelling narrative, isn't it? The empire brought down by its own plumbing. A true historical irony. These proponents point to various pieces of evidence. For instance, skeletal remains from Roman sites sometimes show elevated lead levels. Ancient texts occasionally describe symptoms consistent with lead poisoning, although they wouldn't have understood the cause. And the sheer quantity of lead used in the Roman world, not just in pipes, but in pottery, glazes, paints, and coinage, suggests a widespread presence of the metal in their daily lives. You can almost hear the grumpy Roman citizen complaining about a headache. It's this water, I tell you. Tastes a bit ... not metallic today. However, on the other side of the debate, many historians and scientists offer a more nuanced and perhaps less dramatic perspective. They argue that while Romans certainly consumed lead, the actual impact on public health might have been less catastrophic than often portrayed. Firstly, they point out that the water in Roman aqueducts, especially in the larger main channels, flowed constantly and quickly. This rapid movement would have limited the time the water spent in contact with the lead pipes, reducing the amount of lead that leached into the supply. Think of it like rinsing a lead pipe with a fire. Not much time for the lead to dissolve. Secondly, many Roman waters, particularly those from limestone-rich springs, were hard water. Hard water contains high levels of calcium and magnesium. When this water flowed through lead pipes, these minerals would quickly form a protective layer of calcium carbonate, or limescale, on the inside of the pipes. This scale acted as a barrier, preventing the water from directly contacting the lead and significantly reducing lead leaching. It was like nature's own pipeliner, a happy accidental safety feature. So, while the lead was there, it wasn't always directly exposed to the water for long periods. Thirdly, as mentioned, not everyone had private lead pipes. The vast majority of the population relied on public fountains, where the water often flowed freely from the castellum through relatively short sections of lead pipe before gushing into the open air of the basin. The exposure here would have been considerably lower than for a wealthy individual whose water traveled a longer distance through lead pipes to their private villa. So, while the rich might have been enjoying their poisoned chalice, the common folk were perhaps less affected by this particular poison. Furthermore, proponents of this view argue that other environmental factors and diseases would have been far more prevalent and impactful on Roman health and mortality rates. Unsanitary conditions, poor diet, limited medical knowledge, and infectious diseases like malaria and smallpox would have been far greater threats than chronic lead poisoning for the average Roman. You probably had more to worry about from your neighbor's questionable hygiene practices than from the lead in your fountain water. Historians still argue whether the effects of lead poisoning were truly widespread enough to impact the entire empire's trajectory or primarily affected the wealthy elite. It's an ongoing area of research, with new studies analyzing ancient ice cores and bone samples continually adding to our understanding. What is clear, however, is that the Romans were unaware of lead's toxic properties. They focused on its practical benefits, its malleability, and its resistance to corrosion. The dangers were simply not understood, a classic case of technological advancement outpacing scientific knowledge. So, while the brilliant Roman engineers were masters of hydraulics and construction, their choice of materials occasionally came with a hidden cost. When you imagine that cool, pure water gushing from a Roman fountain, remember the silent, unseen element of lead lurking within its pathways. It's a stark reminder that even the most advanced civilizations can have blind spots, and that sometimes the seemingly perfect solution can have unintended, long-term consequences. A bit of a buzzkill for our otherwise glorious fountain story, perhaps, but an important historical reality nonetheless. We've pondered the plumbing, the purity, and the potential poisons, but let's shift our gaze from the gushing spouts of the public fountains to another glorious facet of Roman water culture: the thermal baths. These weren't just places to get clean. They were colossal, sprawling complexes that served as the beating heart of Roman social, cultural, and even intellectual life. Fed by the same intricate aqueduct systems, the baths amplified Rome's love affair with water, transforming it into a luxurious, communal experience. Imagine, if you will, a typical Roman day. You've been to the forum, perhaps argued a case, or simply done your shopping. The sun is high and the city's dust clings to you. What's your next move? For most Romans, it was a trip to the baths. This wasn't a quick shower and out. It was an event, often lasting for hours. You'd gather your strigil, a curved metal scraper for cleaning oil and dirt, your towel, maybe some olive oil, and head off to your local thermae or balnea. These public bathhouses were ubiquitous, dotted throughout the city like Starbucks are in modern metropolises, but infinitely more grand and purposeful. Fancy a dip, old chap. Heard they've got a new mosaic in the tepidarium. Upon entering, you wouldn't just find pools of water. The Roman baths were an architectural marvel in themselves, often featuring towering vaulted ceilings, elaborate mosaics, and stunning marble statues. They were designed not just for function, but for grandeur, echoing the same aesthetic principles we saw in the public fountains, but on a supersized scale. Think of it as a combination of a modern spa, a community center, a gym, and a lecture hall, all under one often magnificent roof. Your journey through the baths typically followed a set sequence, a delightful watery dance. First, the appetite, the changing room. Here you'd shed your clothes, perhaps entrusting them to a slave, and prepare for your ablutions. Then you might head to the palestra, an open-air exercise yard, where you could wrestle, lift weights, probably more like heavy rocks, or play ball games. Imagine the grunts and groans, the shouts of encouragement, all under the Roman sun. After working up a sweat and some serious Roman-level body odor, you'd move into the heated rooms. The tepidarium was first, a warm room designed to help. You acclimatized to the heat and perhaps get a pre-clean with oil and the trusty strigil. It was a gentle introduction, a warm hug before the main event. Next came the calidorium, the hot room. This was the Roman sauna, intensely heated by an ingenious underfloor heating system called the hypocaust. Hot air from furnaces circulated beneath the floor and through hollow walls, creating a humid, steamy environment. You'd sweat profusely, opening your pores and truly getting clean, scraping off the oil and grime with your strigil. It's probably where most of the Roman gossip was exchanged, amidst the steam and the scraping. Did you hear about Brutus? Apparently, he slipped on a bar of soap in the calidarium yesterday. Shameful. Finally, for the brave, there was the frigidarium, the cold plunge bath. A shock to the system, designed to close the pores and invigorate the body. Imagine stepping from intense heat into an icy pool. It certainly wakes you up, doesn't it? It was a ritualistic cleansing, a sensory reset. And sometimes, these frigidaria were enormous open-air pools, inviting grand swims and leisurely dips. But the baths were so much more than just a place to wash. They were crucial social hubs. It was where Romans of all social strata, though, often separated by gender or time of day, mingled. Business deals were struck, political alliances forged, friendships deepened, and yes, plenty of idle chatter and gossip exchanged. It was a truly democratic space in a hierarchical society. You might find a senator debating philosophy with a merchant, or a poet reciting verses to a captive audience of bathers. It was the ultimate networking event, only with more nudity and fewer business cards. The baths also offered a host of other amenities. Libraries, lecture halls, shops selling snacks and perfumes, even massage rooms. They were truly integrated community centers, places where you could spend hours, nourishing both body and mind. The larger imperial baths, like the baths of Caracalla or Diocletian, were truly monumental complexes, capable of accommodating thousands of bathers at once. They even had dedicated water lines from the aqueducts, often receiving the purest, most plentiful supply after the public fountains. The sheer volume of water required to operate these baths was staggering. Furnaces had to be stoked constantly, and fresh water needed to flow in and out of the pools to maintain hygiene. The Romans developed sophisticated drainage systems to carry away the dirty water, often feeding it into the Cloaca Maxima or using it to flush public latrines. This constant circulation was key to keeping the baths relatively clean, despite the immense foot traffic. Historians still argue whether the hygiene standards of Roman baths were truly effective in preventing disease, transmission, or if they merely gave the illusion of cleanliness. It's a fair question, given the communal nature of the experience. So, when we talk about Romans loving their public fountains, we must also consider the grand extension of that love, the thermal baths. They took the basic necessity of water and elevated it to an art form, a social institution, and a symbol of their advanced civilization. It was a place where body and soul were cleansed, where connections were forged, and where the constant gurgle and splash of water provided a soothing backdrop to the vibrant pulse of Roman life. It's hard to imagine life without a regular shower, isn't it? For the Romans, the baths offered that, and so much more. We've bathed in the social splendor of the thermae and marveled at the engineering that kept the taps flowing. Now, let's bring our focus back to the public fountain itself, not just as a source of vital liquid, but as a masterpiece of design, an integral part of the Roman urban tapestry, showcasing the fountain as public art. For the Romans, aesthetics were rarely an afterthought. utility and beauty were often intertwined, especially when it came to their water features. Imagine strolling through Rome, not just dodging carts and crowds, but also encountering these incredible works of art at regular intervals. These weren't just functional spouts. They were carefully planned architectural elements designed to enhance the city's beauty and reflect its grandeur. Think of them as open-air museums with constantly flowing, interactive exhibits. Oh look, another fountain. Is that Neptune riding a seahorse, or just a really happy dolphin? The materials themselves spoke of luxury and permanence. Many public fountains were constructed from gleaming marble, often imported from distant quarries and carved with exquisite detail. Imagine the sun glinting off the polished white or colored marble, the water sparkling as it cascaded over sculpted surfaces. It wasn't just about utility. It was about elevating the mundane act of fetching water into an aesthetic experience. The contrast between the dusty, busy streets and the cool, clean elegance of a fountain must have been striking. The themes depicted in fountain sculptures were rich with meaning. You'd often find deities associated with water, like Neptune, the god of the sea, or nymphs and tritons, mythical beings of springs and oceans. These figures weren't just decorative. They invoked a sense of the divine blessing that water brought, a tangible link between the earthly necessity and the benevolent powers above. Imagine seeing a statue of a river god perpetually pouring water from an urn, a symbolic representation of the aqueduct itself, endlessly supplying the city. It was a constant, visual reminder of nature's bounty and Rome's ability to harness it. Beyond the mythological, some fountains depicted scenes from Roman history, military victories, or allegories of civic virtues. They served as a form of public education and propaganda, subtly reinforcing Roman values and achievements to anyone who came to collect water. Every visit to the fountain became a mini lesson in Roman greatness. See, young one, this fountain commemorates the battle where we absolutely trounced those pesky Gauls. Now, fill your bucket. The design of the fountain basins themselves often varied wildly, from simple, unadorned troughs to elaborate, multi-tiered arrangements that created mini waterfalls and cascades. The sound of these cascading waters, the gentle splash and murmur, would have been a constant, soothing presence in the noisy urban environment. It was a form of acoustic architecture, creating pockets of tranquility and natural sound amidst the clamor. You could almost hear the city breathing through its fountains. Many fountains, especially the more monumental Nympha, were integrated seamlessly into larger architectural complexes, acting as central features of plazas, forums, or even private villas that opened to the public. They defined spaces, drawing the eye and creating natural gathering points. Picture the forum, not just as a collection of temples and basilicas, but punctuated by the sparkling presence of a grand fountain, drawing people in, inviting contemplation. The patrons who commissioned these magnificent public art pieces understood their power. They weren't just commissioning a drinking fountain, they were commissioning a legacy. A beautifully designed and well-maintained fountain could bring lasting fame to its benefactor, ensuring their name was remembered by generations of grateful citizens. It was a tangible, beautiful way to contribute to the public good and etch one's mark on the urban landscape. Historians still argue whether the primary motivation for these artistic embellishments was genuine civic altruism or purely a means of self-aggrandizement for the wealthy patrons. Likely, it was a delightful blend of both, with a healthy dose of Roman pragmatism thrown in. Consider the craftspeople involved in their creation. the master masons, the sculptors, the hydraulic engineers working in tandem. It required a multidisciplinary approach, a collaboration of artistic vision and technical expertise. The precision needed to carve complex marble figures that would withstand the constant flow of water, to design basins that wouldn't overflow or become stagnant, was immense. These artisans were at the pinnacle of their respective fields, leaving behind a legacy that continues to inspire. Even the everyday, utilitarian fountains, the lacus or salientas that dotted every street, contributed to the overall aesthetic. While perhaps not as adorned as the grand nymphia, their sheer ubiquity and consistent flow added a sense of vitality and cleanliness to the city. They were the background music of Roman public art, subtly elevating the everyday experience. So, when the Romans flocked to their public fountains, they weren't just satisfying a physical need. They were engaging with their city's beauty, absorbing its myths and history, and celebrating its power and prosperity, all through the elegant medium of flowing water. The fountains were living, breathing sculptures, constantly refreshed and refreshing, truly cementing their place, not just as utilities, but as cherished masterpieces of public art. It makes you wonder why modern public art isn't quite so useful, doesn't it? Imagine if that abstract metal sculpture downtown also dispensed free soda. Now that would be art we could all appreciate. Section 9. You've seen the fountains as practical lifelines and as magnificent works of art, but the Roman relationship with water ran even deeper than utility or aesthetics. It tapped into something more profound, more ancient. For the Romans, water wasn't just H2O. It held immense religious significance, imbuing public fountains with a spiritual aura that further cemented their beloved status. Imagine, for a moment, the natural world through ancient Roman eyes. They lived in an era when the elements were not just forces of nature, but often personified as deities or spirits. Rivers, springs, lakes. These weren't just geographical features. They were homes to powerful beings. And water itself, in all its forms, was seen as sacred, a gift from the gods. This worldview profoundly shaped their interaction with and reverence for the public fountains. Oh, bless this water, sent by the nymphs themselves. Probably tastes better than that stale stuff from the Tiber. At the heart of this spiritual connection were the nymphs, minor goddesses or spirits associated with natural springs, rivers, and grottos. Many of the grander fountains, as we touched upon, were known as nymphaea, literally shrines to the nymphs. These structures weren't just decorative. They were considered sacred spaces where one could honor these water deities. Imagine approaching a fountain, not just to fill your bucket, but to offer a small prayer, to leave a humble offering, acknowledging the divine source of this life-giving liquid. Springs, in particular, were often considered holy sites, even before the Romans started building aqueducts. The very act of tapping into a spring and bringing its waters to the city through an aqueduct was, in a way, an act of communion with these natural spirits, a channeling of divine energy into the urban realm. It suggested that Rome was not merely dominating nature, but was blessed by it, working in harmony with its sacred forces. Beyond the nymphs, other major Roman gods were deeply connected to water. Neptune, of course, was the god of the sea, often depicted with his trident commanding the waves. While more associated with the ocean, his presence on many fountain sculptures served as a reminder of water's immense power and vital role. Then there were lesser-known deities like Fons, the god of springs and fountains, who even had his own festival, the Fontinalia, celebrated in October. During this festival, garlands of flowers would be placed on wells and fountains, and offerings would be cast into springs. Imagine the public fountains, already bustling, adorned with vibrant blossoms, a momentary softening of the marble into something more organic and celebratory. It was a day to give thanks for the ceaseless flow that sustained their lives. Water also played a crucial role in various Roman rituals and religious ceremonies. Before sacrifices, priests and worshippers would perform ritualistic ablutions, washing their hands and sometimes their faces to purify themselves. While not always at public fountains, the presence of clean, flowing water made such purification rituals accessible and commonplace. It was an essential part of maintaining Pax Deorum, the peace of the gods, ensuring divine favor for the city. Even the location of some fountains could hold religious significance. They might be built at crossroads or near temples, acting as focal points for both secular and sacred activity. The water itself, constantly flowing, represented purity, renewal, and fertility. It was a tangible symbol of life perpetually regenerating, washing away the old and ushering in the new. This symbolic power contributed to the reverence people felt for the public fountains. Consider the act of drinking from a fountain. For us, it's just hydration. For a Roman, it might have been a subtle form of communion, an intake of water blessed by the gods, invigorating not just the body, but also the spirit. The coolness of the water, its clarity, its constant movement, all these sensory details could evoke a sense of the divine, a feeling of being connected to something larger than oneself. Historians still argue whether the average Roman truly had a deep, personal, spiritual connection to individual fountains, or if it was more of a general cultural understanding of water's sacred nature. It was likely a spectrum, from genuine reverence to casual acknowledgement. The very act of maintaining the aqueducts and fountains could also be seen as a pious duty. Ensuring the water flowed freely and cleanly was not just good governance. It was also a way of showing respect to the water deities, ensuring their continued benevolence. A broken aqueduct or a dry fountain might not just be a civic failure, but a sign of divine displeasure. No pressure, Roman engineers. So, the next time you picture a Roman filling their amphora at a public fountain, try to add another layer to that image. See not just the practical act or the appreciation of art, but also a quiet moment of spiritual connection. The gentle gurgle wasn't just the sound of water. It was the whisper of nymphs, the blessing of fauns, the very pulse of a city sustained by divine favor. This deep-seated religious reverence, intertwined with their practical needs and artistic sensibilities, undoubtedly contributed to why the ancient Romans cherished their public fountains so profoundly. It wasn't just a physical need being met. It was a spiritual one too. And who wouldn't love a fountain that offers both? Section 10. We've journeyed through the spiritual, the artistic, and the downright practical reasons for the Roman affection for public fountains. But now, let's turn our attention to a critical social dimension, the delicate, often contentious, balance between private versus public access to Rome's precious water supply. While the public fountains were celebrated as a democratic boon, the reality of water distribution was, like many aspects of Roman society, deeply hierarchical. Imagine living in a massive, bustling city like Rome, where water is the lifeblood. On one hand, you have the glorious, ever-gushing public fountains, free for anyone to use. This was the ideal, the image of civic generosity that Rome projected. It was a powerful tool for social cohesion, allowing everyone, from the humblest plebeian to the most esteemed citizen, equal access to this vital resource. This ensured a baseline level of hydration and hygiene for the masses, undoubtedly contributing to social stability. A well-hydrated populace is generally a happier, less rebellious populace, wouldn't you agree? However, on the other hand, there was the allure of private water connections. If you were wealthy enough, influential enough, or an institution important enough, you could apply for a direct pipe from the aqueduct system to your private residence, your villa, or your business. This was the ultimate luxury, a symbol of immense status. Imagine the convenience: fresh, clean water flowing directly into your home. No need to send slaves or family members to fetch it from the public fountain. It was the ancient Roman equivalent of having a swimming pool in your backyard, only infinitely more practical. Oh, the Joneses just got a new fistula. Their fountains are gushing like Mount Vesuvius in spring. These private connections were granted by the emperor or the senate, not as a right, but as a privilege. They often came with a hefty fee, both for the initial connection and for ongoing maintenance, creating a significant revenue stream for the city. The size of your calyx, the bronze nozzle that regulated the water flow into your private pipe, determined how much water you received, and thus how much you paid. This system created a tiered access model: abundant, free water for the many, and convenient, paid-for luxury water for the few. The tension between these two modes of access was palpable. While the public fountains were meant to serve everyone, the sheer volume of water channeled to private users, especially the sprawling villas of the wealthy, could sometimes impact the flow to public outlets, particularly during periods of drought or maintenance. This naturally led to resentment. Imagine being a regular Roman citizen lining up at a public fountain that's barely trickling, while down the street a senator's private fountain is gushing away, watering his garden and filling his ornamental ponds. It's enough to make a Roman a bit cross, isn't it? Frontinus, our diligent water commissioner, was acutely aware of this imbalance and the widespread abuses associated with private connections. He meticulously documented cases of illegal tapping, where individuals would secretly connect pipes to the main aqueduct lines without permission, or use oversized calyces to draw more water than they were entitled to. He even described how some dishonest water officials would collaborate with private citizens in these illicit schemes, making a tidy profit on the side. It was an elaborate system of ancient water fraud, demonstrating that human ingenuity for cutting corners is timeless. Don't tell Frontinus, but my bath is always full these days. Frontinus was zealous in his attempts to curb these abuses, recognizing that every gallon diverted illegally from the private supply was a gallon less for the public good. He believed strongly in prioritizing the public use of water for fountains and baths, seeing it as essential for the well-being of the city. His writings provide invaluable insight into the constant struggle to manage a resource that was both a public good and a private luxury. Historians still argue whether Frontinus's reforms had a lasting impact on reducing illegal water connections, or if the problem continued to plague the system for centuries. Given the persistence of human nature, it was probably an ongoing battle. Moreover, certain public institutions, like the imperial baths and some temples, also received preferential treatment, with massive, dedicated water allocations. This was understandable, given their public function, but it further highlighted the unequal distribution of Rome's watery bounty. The public fountains were for daily necessities, but the truly impressive spectacles of water were often reserved for the grandest institutions and and the most powerful individuals. The existence of private connections also led to an interesting form of urban development. Wealthy Romans could build their elaborate villas on higher ground, knowing they could still have access to piped water, whereas most ordinary citizens were clustered around the public fountains in the lower, denser parts of the city. This further stratified Roman society, with water access literally determining one's residential options. So, while the image of the democratic public fountain is a powerful one, the reality was a complex interplay of public service and private privilege. The Romans loved their public fountains because they were essential, yes, but also because they represented a crucial, if sometimes strained, balance in their society. They provided a basic right for all, while simultaneously showcasing the immense wealth and power that could command a private flow. It was a system that worked, albeit imperfectly, demonstrating both the generous and the stratified nature of Roman urban life. It's a reminder that even in ancient times, the debate about who gets what and how much was a constant undercurrent. Section 11, you've explored the social dynamics of water access. The haves and the have-nots, all orbiting around the vital flow, but that flow, that constant gush from hundreds of fountains across Rome, wasn't a given. It was the result of perpetual vigilance and an immense, often thankless, amount of work dedicated to maintenance and repair challenges. Keeping a multi-mile gravity-fed water system running for centuries was frankly a logistical nightmare and a testament to Roman tenacity. Imagine for a moment not a single water pipe, but a vast network of stone channels, lead pipes, and masonry structures stretching for tens of miles through varied landscapes. Now, imagine all the ways things could go wrong. Earthquakes, floods, landslides, extreme weather, calcification, accidental damage, deliberate sabotage, even just the relentless march of time all conspired to interrupt the flow. It's like trying to keep 1,000 ancient leaky garden hoses perfectly aligned and flowing uphill and downhill for generations. Another section collapsed. Didn't we just fix that last month? This is why I can't have nice things, like continuous running water. One of the most persistent and insidious problems was calcification, or the buildup of mineral deposits inside the aqueduct channels. Many of the springs that fed Rome's aqueducts, particularly those from limestone regions, carried dissolved calcium carbonate. Over time, as the water flowed, these minerals would precipitate out, forming thick, hard layers of limescale on the walls and floor of the specus. Imagine your kettle, but on an industrial scale, lining a channel miles long. This buildup would gradually reduce the cross-sectional area of the channel, slowing the flow and diminishing the amount of water delivered. To combat this, maintenance crews, part of our familia aquaria, had to periodically enter the channels and literally chip away these deposits. This was grueling, claustrophobic work done in dim light, often in cramped conditions, with picks and chisels. Some channels were large enough to stand in, but others required crawling. Picture someone spending their workday in a giant, damp, echoing pipe, chipping away at stubborn rock, with the constant awareness that the water could be turned back on at any moment if they weren't careful. Not exactly the dream job, is it? Historians still argue about the frequency and efficiency of these cleaning operations, suggesting they were often reactive rather than preventative, leading to periods of reduced flow. Then there were the structural repairs. The elevated sections of the aqueducts, the iconic arches, were susceptible to seismic activity. Rome sits in an active seismic zone, and earthquakes, Even minor ones could cause cracks, shifts, or even partial collapses of the massive masonry structures. When this happened, repairs had to be swift and robust. Teams of masons, carpenters, and engineers would rush to the site, scaffolding would go up, and skilled craftsmen would set about rebuilding damaged sections, often using opus cementitium Roman concrete for speed and durability. Imagine trying to fix a leaning bridge while still wanting to keep the water flowing, if at all possible. It required immense coordination. Natural disasters were another constant threat. Heavy rains could cause flash floods, undermining foundations, or washing away sections of the aqueduct. Landslides in the hilly terrain where the aqueducts originated could block channels or damage intake structures. The Roman engineers had to design the aqueducts with resilience in mind, incorporating features like strong foundations and diversion channels. But even the best designs couldn't withstand every force of nature. It was a constant battle against the elements, often fought in mud and driving rain. Accidental damage was also a factor. Agricultural activity, quarrying, or even new construction projects near an aqueduct could inadvertently weaken its structure or damage its pipes. And, of course, during periods of conflict, aqueducts were prime targets for enemy forces. Cutting off Rome's water supply was a classic siege tactic, leading to frantic repair efforts once peace was restored. Beyond the major structural issues, there were the smaller but equally disruptive leaks and blockages in the extensive network of lead and terracotta pipes beneath the city. Tree roots, shifting ground, faulty pipe joints, or debris entering the system could all cause a reduction in flow to specific fountains or baths. Locating these underground leaks without modern detection equipment was a challenge in itself, often requiring careful listening or excavation along suspected routes. Imagine digging up half a street just to find a tiny pinhole leak. Talk about inconvenient. And let's not forget human factors beyond the illicit tapping we discussed earlier. Vandals, although probably less common with such a vital public utility, could cause damage. Even simple wear and tear from centuries of use meant that components constantly needed inspection and replacement. The Familia Aquaria had to be constantly patrolling, assessing, and responding to issues, ensuring the precious flow remained uninterrupted. Their work was vital, yet largely invisible to the ordinary Roman, who simply expected the water to be there. The sheer organizational challenge of managing these repairs across vast distances, with limited communication and transportation, was extraordinary. It required meticulous record-keeping, thank you Frontinus, a well-trained workforce, and a clear chain of command. The curator aquarum truly earned his pay, coordinating these massive undertakings. So, the next time you picture a Roman fountain, don't just imagine its pristine beauty. Think also of the endless grind of maintenance, the constant battle against nature and entropy, the chipping away of limescale in dark tunnels, and the urgent repairs after a tremor. It was this unending dedication to upkeep, this commitment to overcoming every challenge, that ensured Rome's public fountains remained the beloved, life-giving arteries of the city for so many centuries. It truly makes you appreciate the unsung heroes of ancient infrastructure, doesn't it? Though I'm quite certain none of them had a union. You felt the grind of maintenance, the constant battle to keep the water flowing. But let's shift our senses for a moment, moving beyond the visual splendor and the physical sensation of cool water, to something more subtle, yet profoundly impactful, the sound of water. For the ancient Romans, living in a bustling city without the roar of modern traffic, The constant murmur and splash of their public fountains would have created a unique and pervasive urban soundscape, a gentle, omnipresent hum that was as much a part of their daily lives as the sight of the Capitol or the smell of baking bread. Imagine standing in a Roman piazza. Close your eyes. What do you hear? The distant rumble of carts, the chatter of voices, perhaps the cry of a street vendor selling fresh fish. But woven into all of that, a continuous, soothing backdrop, the gurgle of water emerging from a spout, the soft splash as it hits the basin, the gentle overflow cascading into drains. It wasn't just a sound, it was the sound of Rome, a constant reminder of the city's vitality and the miraculous presence of fresh water. Ah, the sound of prosperity, you might think. As you listened to the rhythmic gush, this constant acoustic presence would have had a profound psychological effect. In a pre-industrial world, absolute silence was probably rare in a large city, but the sounds that dominated were often harsh or jarring. The creak of wooden wheels, the clang of metalworking, the cacophony of a marketplace. The fountains offered a counterpoint, a natural, calming melody. The gentle murmur of water is inherently soothing, a white noise that can mask other, less pleasant urban sounds. It would have provided pockets of acoustic tranquility, even amidst the chaos. Imagine trying to meditate in ancient Rome. The sound of a fountain would be your immediate go. The various types of fountains would have produced different sonic qualities. The Grand Nymphaea, with their multiple cascades and elaborate water features, would have offered a symphony of splashes, trickles, and rushing flows, almost like miniature waterfalls. The sound would have been rich and complex, drawing people in, inviting them to linger. You could probably tell the grandeur of a fountain just by listening to it from afar. That's a powerful gush. Must be the new one down by the Forum. Smaller, more utilitarian street fountains, the Lacus, might have had a simpler, more consistent gurgle and splash, a steady rhythm that became part of the background hum of daily life. This constant presence would have made the city feel alive and vibrant, distinct from less well-watered settlements. It was a tangible marker of Roman sophistication. Historians still argue whether the acoustic design of fountains was a deliberate consideration during their planning, or merely a delightful byproduct of the engineering and artistic choices. Given Roman attention to sensory detail, it's highly probable they appreciated the auditory appeal. Consider the heat of a Roman summer day. The sound of water, even without feeling the spray, evokes a sense of coolness and refreshment. It's a psychological trick, a Pavlovian response. Just hearing the splash would make you feel cooler, even if you were still melting in your toga. It acted as an auditory oasis, a promise of relief in the oppressive heat. That sound, it's almost as good as a cool breeze, isn't it? The sound of the fountains also signified reliability. A constant, strong flow meant the aqueduct was functioning, the water supply was secure, and all was well with the world. A weakening gurgle, or worse, silence, would have been a cause for immediate concern, a sign that something was amiss with the city's lifeblood. The sound, therefore, became an auditory indicator of the city's well-being. It was the ancient Roman equivalent of checking your phone for a network signal, and for those who lived near a fountain, the constant sound would have become a comforting presence, like the distant hum of a refrigerator or the gentle lapping of waves on a shore. It marked the passage of time, a constant, unchanging element in a world of flux. You might fall asleep to its lullaby and wake to its steady rhythm. It truly permeated their daily experience in ways we, living in a world dominated by machine. Noise can scarcely imagine. The sensory immersion of Roman life was complete. The sight of grand architecture, the feel of cool marble and water, the taste of fresh spring water, and the pervasive, soothing sound of the public fountains. This often overlooked acoustic dimension added another layer to the Romans' deep appreciation and dependence on their water features. It was the ambient soundtrack of their civilization, a quiet testament to their engineering prowess and their ability to integrate utility with environmental enrichment. So next time you hear a fountain anywhere, take a moment to imagine it in ancient Rome. It would have been the sound of life itself. We've been serenaded by the sound of Roman fountains and admired their artistic grandeur. But let's turn our attention to something a little more lively, something that injected an element of spectacle and fun into the already vital role of public water. The ways in which fountains were sometimes integrated into fountain games and spectacles. While not an everyday occurrence, these events highlight how deeply ingrained water was in Roman culture, even finding its way into their entertainment. Imagine a special festival day in Rome. The air is buzzing with excitement, perhaps for a religious celebration or a triumph. You're expecting parades, chariot races, gladiatorial contests, but then you hear whispers about something happening at one of the city's granda nympha. What could it be? Perhaps a specially commissioned display of water jets, or even something more elaborate. The Romans loved a good show, and their mastery of hydraulics meant they could make water dance. Did you hear? Emperor Nero is apparently having his bath water scented with rose petals today, and the fountain will spray wine. Okay, maybe not. Wine for the public fountains. But a Roman can dream. The most direct example of fountains being incorporated into spectacle comes from the private, lavish villas of the elite, and sometimes by extension, public displays commissioned by emperors. While not strictly public fountains in the sense of a communal drinking source, the technology and the mindset were the same. Imagine a wealthy Roman patron hosting a garden party. Their private nymphium wouldn't just be a pretty backdrop. It might feature elaborate mechanical devices that could suddenly change the water flow, creating unexpected sprays, or even animate small figures. These were early forms of automata, powered entirely by water pressure. A bird might suddenly appear to sing gurgle, really, as water flowed through it, or a statue might weep tears of water. These water organs and trick fountains were a marvel of ancient engineering and a source of endless delight for guests. Now, extend that concept to the public sphere, especially for grand imperial celebrations. While not as common as everyday spectacles, there are accounts of emperors commissioning extraordinary water displays. Think of the Naumachia, the mock naval battles staged on artificial lakes. While these required immense purpose-built basins, the underlying principle of controlling and moving vast quantities of water with precision was the same as that for the aqueducts and fountains. And sometimes, public spaces, particularly forums, or areas near major baths, might be temporarily adorned with special water features or enhanced fountain displays for grand civic events. Imagine the sheer artistry of coordinating multiple fountains to create a choreographed watery ballet. The idea of water as an element of surprise and delight was not lost on the Romans. The sound of water, as we discussed, was soothing, but a sudden, unexpected jet could be amusing. One quirky tidbit from Roman sources mentions water-powered clocks, known as clepsydra, which, while primarily functional, were often beautifully ornate and could be seen as mini fountain spectacles in themselves. They marked time with a steady drip or flow, sometimes incorporating intricate mechanisms. It's not quite a game, but it shows the Roman fascination with water's potential beyond just drinking. Another, perhaps less formal, game associated with fountains would have been the sheer joy of cooling off on a scorching Roman day. Children, and probably quite a few adults, would have splashed in the fountain basins, letting the cool water wash over them. While perhaps not an organized game, the relief and momentary fun derived from these interactions would have been immense. Imagine the laughter, the shouts, the sheer unbridled joy of a child splashing in a public fountain, much like kids do in city fountains today. It's a timeless pleasure, the most famous direct example of a fountain game in the modern sense comes from much later, in the Renaissance, with the elaborate trick fountains of Italian villas. However, these were directly inspired by descriptions of Roman hydraulics and the concept of otium leisure and spectacle that the Romans cherished. While the ancient Roman public fountains were not typically trick fountains designed to douse unwary passers-by that might lead to riots, frankly, the underlying technology and the appreciation for water as a source of wonder were firmly established. Historians still argue whether the more elaborate water automata and trick fountains of the Roman imperial era were truly widespread in public spaces, or if they were largely confined to the private, exclusive realms of the ultra-wealthy. Given the immense cost and complexity, it's likely they were rare public spectacles, perhaps reserved for imperial triumphs or the inauguration of a particularly grand bath complex. They would have been a testament to the emperor's generosity and the empire's unparalleled engineering capabilities. So, while the daily interaction with public fountains was primarily practical and often artistic, the Romans also recognized water's potential for awe and entertainment. These occasional fountain games and spectacles served as a glittering testament to their hydraulic mastery, transforming a fundamental necessity into a fleeting moment of wonder, a playful splash in the grand narrative of Roman life. It's a reminder that even the most stoic empire knew how to have a bit of fun. Section 14. You've imagined the playful splashes and the grand spectacles that Roman fountains could offer. But let's step back and consider who truly orchestrated these dazzling displays of watery power and munificence. It often came down to one man, or rather, the ruling body that man represented, the emperor's waterworks. For the Roman emperors, magnificent fountains and colossal aqueduct projects weren't just civic improvements. They were potent tools of propaganda, tangible demonstrations of their benevolence, wealth, and the very stability of their reign. Imagine being an emperor in Rome, holding the reins of a vast empire. What better way to cement your popularity and demonstrate your divine favor than to literally bring life-giving water to your people? When an emperor commissioned a new aqueduct or a monumental fountain, it wasn't merely a public works project. It was a grand gesture, a visual promise of prosperity and care for his citizens. Behold, citizens, I, Emperor, insert name here, have gifted you this magnificent fountain. Drink deeply and remember who provides. It was a subtle, yet incredibly effective, form of advertising. Take, for instance, Augustus, the first Roman emperor. He understood the power of public works like no other. His right-hand man, Agrippa, was famously dedicated to Rome's water supply, repairing old aqueducts and building new ones, like the Aqua Augusta which we touched on earlier. Agrippa, acting on Augustus's behalf, even personally funded the construction of 700 public drinking basins, 105 reservoirs, and 130 water distribution points. Imagine the goodwill this generated. It was a clear message. Under Augustus's rule, Rome would flourish, and its citizens would never thirst. Augustus famously boasted that he found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. Much of that marble was, coincidentally, used for water features. Later emperors continued this tradition, each vying to outdo their predecessors in terms of scale and grandeur. The construction of the massive imperial baths, like those of Caracalla and Diocletian, which we previously explored, required enormous dedicated water supplies from new or existing aqueducts. These baths, complete with their monumental fountains and elaborate swimming pools, were not just for public hygiene. They were architectural statements, symbols of imperial might and generosity. Building such a complex was a way for an emperor to leave an indelible mark on the city and in the minds of its people. My baths are bigger than his baths, and my fountains gush higher. The sheer scale of these imperial projects was staggering. They often involved diverting entire rivers, tunneling through mountains, and spanning vast valleys. The resources, both financial and human, required for such undertakings could only be commanded by the emperor himself. When you saw a new, colossal aqueduct marching across the landscape, or a magnificent new nymphaeum sparkling in the heart of the city, you knew it was the emperor's doing. It was a physical manifestation of his authority and his concern for the welfare of his subjects. Moreover, the water provided by these imperial initiatives was often explicitly tied to the emperor's image. Inscriptions on fountains and aqueducts would proudly bear the emperor's name, ensuring that every sip of water, every refreshing splash, subtly reinforced his power and beneficence. Sometimes, statues of the emperor himself or members of his family would adorn the fountains, literally putting a face to the gift. It was a very clever way to integrate himself into the daily lives of the citizens, almost a constant, subliminal message. Your well-being flows directly from me. Even during times of political instability or economic hardship, maintaining the water supply was a top priority for emperors. A functioning aqueduct and overflowing public fountains symbolized stability and continued imperial care. A dry fountain, on the other hand, could be a sign of neglect, weakness, or even impending doom. A truly bad omen for any emperor. Historians still argue whether the consistent provision of water was genuinely driven by a sense of civic duty or was primarily a cynical tool for social control and maintaining public peace. Given the intricate dance of Roman politics, it was likely a powerful combination of both. The system of granting private water connections while creating social stratification also ultimately served the imperial agenda. The emperor controlled who received these lucrative permits, giving him another lever of patronage and influence over the wealthy elite. Favors could be granted, and loyalty could be rewarded, all through the precious medium of water access. In essence, the Roman emperors understood that control over water was control over the city itself. By investing heavily in aqueducts and fountains, and making them highly visible, grand spectacles, they solidified their authority, demonstrated their divine favor, and ensured the loyalty of the populace. The public fountains, therefore, were not just beloved civic amenities. They were also powerful symbols of imperial power, flowing testaments to the emperor's ability to provide for his people. And that, my friends, is why the Roman emperors didn't just like their waterworks, they needed them. You've seen the power plays and the propaganda inherent in the emperor's waterworks. But like all empires, even the mightiest, Rome eventually faced decline. And with that decline came the slow, often painful, process of decay for its beloved water systems. We're now entering a period where the constant gush of the public fountains began to falter, marking the decline of the water systems. It's a sobering thought, isn't it? From abundant flow to a mere trickle. Imagine the city of Rome, not at its zenith, but in the twilight of its glory. The aqueducts, once gleaming monuments to engineering, are showing their age. Repairs are less frequent, less meticulous, the workforce dedicated to maintenance. The familia aquaria is shrinking, less well. Invading armies are no longer merely targeting aqueducts as a siege tactic. They are actively destroying them, not with a view to future repair, but as a definitive act of conquest and dismantling. It's a stark contrast to the vigorous efforts of frontiners centuries before. The Aqua Appia. Oh, that old thing. Haven't seen a decent flow from it in years. Probably just a big hole somewhere. The primary factor in the decline was the sheer economic and political instability that plagued the Western Roman Empire from the 3rd century AD onwards. Constant civil wars, a succession of short-lived emperors, economic crises, and mounting military pressures on the frontiers meant that resources once allocated to magnificent public works were increasingly diverted to maintaining the legions and defending the empire. There simply wasn't enough money or consistent political will to keep up with the vast infrastructure needs of the water system. Maintaining a water pipe loses its appeal when barbarians are at the gates, doesn't it? As revenue declined, so too did the public funds available for maintenance. The highly organized administration that had managed the aqueducts for centuries began to unravel. The specialized knowledge of the engineers and the dedicated labor force dwindled. It's one thing to build a complex system. It's another entirely to keep it running for 1,000 years without consistent investment and expertise. Then came the barbarian invasions. Unlike earlier sieges where aqueducts might be temporarily cut, the Gothic siege of Rome by Witiges in 537 AD marked a turning point. The Goths deliberately cut all but one of Rome's 11 aqueducts, not just to starve the city of water, but to destroy its lifeline permanently. Imagine the horror and despair of the Romans as their life-giving flow ceased, as the beloved fountains fell silent. This wasn't just an inconvenience. It was an existential threat, a deliberate attack on the very identity of Rome. After these devastating cuts, the infrastructure simply wasn't adequately repaired. The subsequent depopulation of Rome in the early medieval period meant there was no longer a massive urban population to justify the monumental effort and expense of restoring the full system. The city shrank dramatically, becoming a shadow of its former self, with vast swaths of formerly bustling areas falling into ruin. Why restore a dozen aqueducts for a population that could fit into a single Roman district? The once proud aqueduct channels became overgrown, their masonry crumbled, and the lead pipes were often plundered for their valuable metal. Imagine the desperate scavengers dismantling the very infrastructure that had once sustained them, selling off the lead for coin. It's a sad irony, isn't it? The very material that brought water now became a commodity, hastening the system's demise. With the aqueducts broken, the majestic public fountains, once the pride of the city, fell silent. Their basins became stagnant pools, then filled with rubble and refuse. The once gleaming marble was quarried for new construction or simply crumbled into dust. The sound of gushing water, once omnipresent, vanished, replaced by an eerie quiet. This silence was perhaps the most poignant symbol of Rome's decline. The loss of the aqueducts forced the remaining population to revert to less hygienic water sources, the polluted Tiber River, shallow wells, and rainwater cisterns. This inevitably led to a decline in public health, a rise in waterborne diseases, and further exacerbated the challenges of urban living. The contrast with the Pax Romana, when clean water flowed freely, could not have been more stark. Historians still argue whether the decline of the water system was a cause of Rome's decline, a symptom of it, or a complex interplay where both factors reinforced each other. It's likely the latter, a vicious cycle where a weakened empire couldn't maintain its infrastructure, which in turn weakened the empire further. Some individual aqueducts, or portions of them, did continue to function or were partially repaired. Over the centuries, often under papal authority, to supply key areas or a few fountains. The Aqua Virgo, for example, largely due to its mostly underground route, continued to supply a smaller portion of Rome throughout the Middle Ages, eventually feeding the Trevi fountain centuries later. But the vast, integrated network that had once sustained millions was gone. The decline of Rome's water systems is a powerful reminder that even the most advanced societies are only as strong as their infrastructure. It underscores the fragility of complex systems and the immense effort required not just to build, but to perpetually maintain them. The silence of the fountains, after centuries of vibrant gushing, was a quiet but profound epitaph for a civilization that had once mastered water like no other dot section. 16. You've witnessed the mournful silence of Rome's once glorious fountains, a poignant symbol of an empire's decline. But thankfully, the story doesn't end there. The ingenuity, the aesthetic principles, and the sheer ambition behind Roman water management didn't simply vanish with the empire's fall. Instead, their legacy flowed forward, inspiring generations and leaving an indelible mark on modern urban landscapes. We're now going to trace the echoes in modern cities, seeing how Roman fountain design and engineering continue to influence the world around us. Imagine strolling through a grand European city to Paris, London, or even Rome itself. What do you often find at the heart of their most beautiful squares? Majestic fountains, aren't they? Think of the Trevi fountain in Rome, which, delightfully, is still fed by the ancient Aqua Virgo aqueduct, or the fountains of Versailles, or even the grand civic fountains in countless cities worldwide. These aren't just arbitrary placements. They are direct descendants, both technologically and aesthetically, of their Roman ancestors. A lovely fountain, probably inspired by some old Roman chap who really liked splashing water about. The most obvious legacy is the very concept of the public fountain as a central feature of urban design. The Romans established the idea that water features were not just functional but essential for civic beauty, public gathering, and architectural focal points. This tradition was revived during the Renaissance, particularly in Italy, where artists and engineers drew direct inspiration from rediscovered Roman texts and ruined aqueducts. The magnificent fountains of Rome, rebuilt under papal patronage centuries after the empire's fall, were a conscious effort to restore the city to its former glory, literally bringing its ancient water supply back to life. These Renaissance fountains, in turn, influenced cities across Europe and eventually the world. Technologically, while modern plumbing relies on pumps and complex pipe networks, the fundamental principles of gravity-fed distribution and the management of water pressure were pioneered by the Romans. Even today, many older urban water systems particularly in cities with varied topography, still incorporate elements of gravity flow where possible, minimizing the need for constant pumping. The Roman mastery of gradients and hydraulic principles laid the groundwork for future water engineers, long before anyone dreamed of electric pumps. The durability of Roman engineering, particularly their concrete and masonry construction, provided a template for future builders. The fact that some Roman aqueducts partially survived for centuries, even after neglect and deliberate destruction, speaks volumes about their robust construction methods. While modern materials are different, the emphasis on strong, lasting infrastructure remains a direct philosophical inheritance from Roman times. You can almost hear a modern engineer muttering, "If only they built them like the Romans used to." Even the aesthetic choices persist. The use of mythological figures, allegories, and monumental scale in fountain design is a clear callback to Roman artistry. Many modern fountains feature sculpted figures, often classical in style, or dramatic cascades of water, directly mirroring the Roman nymphia. The idea that a public water feature should be a work of art, enhancing the urban environment, is a deeply Roman concept that has permeated centuries of architectural and urban planning. Consider also the enduring influence on urban planning itself. The Roman emphasis on public spaces, forums, baths, and open squares, centered around a water feature. This concept of the fountain as a natural gathering point, a place for social interaction and communal life, continues to shape urban design today. Parks and plazas frequently feature fountains, not just for beauty, but to attract people and create vibrant public realms. It's like the Romans instinctively knew that people are drawn to the sound and sight of water, and that hasn't changed a bit. Of course, modern water systems are vastly more complex, efficient, and, crucially, less reliant on lead. But the underlying aspiration to provide clean, accessible water to a large urban population remains the same. The Romans faced challenges of scale and density that were unprecedented in their time, and their solutions, though sometimes imperfect, provided invaluable lessons for future civilizations grappling with similar issues. Historians still argue whether Rome's influence on subsequent European cities' water infrastructure was a continuous, direct transfer of knowledge, or more of a rediscovery and reinterpretation of Roman principles after centuries of decline. It was likely a bit of both, a slow burn of inspiration over time. So when you next walk past a public fountain, perhaps tossing a coin for good luck, take a moment to appreciate its deep roots. It's not just a pretty splash, it's an echo of Roman ambition, ingenuity, and their profound love for water. From the grand arching aqueducts to the smallest street corner spout, the Romans carved a path for urban water management that continues to resonate today, reminding us that some ideas, like fresh water, never truly go out of style. You've seen the Roman influence ripple through modern cityscapes, a testament to their enduring legacy. Now, let's pivot slightly and consider the broader lessons embedded in Rome's epic water story. Beyond architectural influence, the challenges the Romans faced, and their ingenious, if sometimes flawed, solutions, offer timeless insights into water management lessons that are surprisingly relevant even today, centuries after their empire crumbled. Imagine a city planner or an environmental scientist today grappling with urban water supply issues. They face challenges of population growth, resource scarcity, pollution, and the sheer logistics of delivering clean water to millions. Sound familiar? These were precisely the problems the Romans grappled with, albeit with different technologies and on a different scale. The fundamental dilemmas haven't really changed. Water scarcity sounds like a job for a new aqueduct. Or maybe, just don't waste it all. One of the most powerful lessons is the absolute necessity of long-term infrastructure investment. The Romans understood that a reliable water supply wasn't a luxury. It was the foundation of urban life. They invested immense resources, both human and financial, not just in building, but in constantly maintaining their aqueducts and distribution systems for centuries. This commitment to robust, enduring infrastructure is a lesson modern societies often need reminding of, as we sometimes prioritize short-term gains over vital, long-term foundational systems. The Romans knew that neglecting their water supply was akin to cutting off their own lifeline. Secondly, the Roman experience highlights the critical importance of water quality and public health. While they didn't understand germ theory, they intuitively recognized that clean, flowing water was healthier than stagnant sources. Their aqueducts brought pure spring water, and their settling tanks, the castella, helped remove impurities. This focus on providing relatively clean water to a large population was a remarkable public health achievement for its time, dramatically reducing waterborne diseases compared to other ancient cities. It's a foundational principle. Clean water equals healthy people. Simple as that. Then there's the perennial challenge of managing water as a common good versus a private commodity. The Roman system, with its free public fountains and its paid private connections, mirrors debates we still have today about water privatization, equitable access, and pricing. Frontinus's struggles against illegal tapping and his efforts to prioritize public use underscore the ongoing tension between individual desire and collective need when it comes to vital resources. How do you ensure everyone gets enough, while also allowing for private convenience without undue burden on the system? The Romans were wrestling with this long before anyone thought of water meters. Historians still argue about the effectiveness of Roman legal frameworks in truly equitable water distribution, or if the rich always found a way to bend the rules. Probably a bit of both, as is often the case. The Roman approach also teaches us about efficient water distribution and waste management. While they didn't measure consumption per household in the modern sense, their system of diverting overflow from fountains into public latrines and sewers demonstrates a pragmatic approach to maximizing the utility of every drop. Water that flowed from a fountain didn't just disappear. It often served a secondary purpose in flushing waste, contributing to overall urban sanitation. It was an early form of integrated water management, recycling water for different uses within the urban environment. Their reliance on gravity-fed systems also offers a powerful lesson in sustainable engineering. Without pumps, they built systems that harnessed natural forces, requiring minimal energy input once constructed. While not directly transferable to all modern contexts, it reminds us of the value of low-energy, resilient infrastructure. Imagine a water system that keeps running even during a power outage, simply because of clever design. That's Roman. Furthermore, the Roman experience in detecting and repairing leaks and blockages in an extensive network provides a historical blueprint for urban maintenance. Their familiar aquaria were engaged in a continuous battle against entropy, a battle that every modern water utility company also faces. The constant vigilance, the systematic inspection, and the rapid response to infrastructure failures were as crucial then as they are now. Finally, the decline of the Roman water systems, which we touched upon, serves as a stark warning. Neglect infrastructure at your peril. When political will wanes, when economic resources dry up, even the most magnificent and vital systems can crumble. It underscores the continuous, proactive investment required to sustain complex urban environments. You can't just build it and forget it. So while we have sophisticated technology today, the ancient Romans provide a powerful, living case study in the challenges and triumphs of urban water management. Their practical solutions, their grand vision, and even their mistakes offer invaluable water management lessons that resonate with remarkable clarity in our own time, reminding us that sometimes the oldest solutions still hold the deepest wisdom. It's almost like they built those aqueducts to teach us something, isn't it? Very thoughtful of them. You've just absorbed some timeless lessons in water management from the Romans, reminding us that even complex modern problems have ancient parallels. But let's delve deeper into the human story behind those colossal achievements. We've spoken of engineers and commissioners, but these grand projects weren't built by decrees alone. They were forged by the sweat, toil, and often brutal reality of the unseen laborers. The construction and maintenance of Rome's beloved aqueducts and fountains relied on a vast, anonymous workforce, often comprising slaves, soldiers, and the urban poor. Imagine the sheer scale of humanity involved. To quarry the stone for miles of aqueduct channels, to dig the trenches, to mix the concrete, to transport massive blocks over rugged terrain, and to then meticulously lay them, one by one, into towering arches. This required armies of workers. We're not talking about a small, skilled team. This was an industrial-scale operation, powered by muscle and simple tools. Another rock, you say? My back says otherwise, but my master's whip disagrees. The backbone of this labor force was often slaves. Roman society was built on slavery, and massive public works projects were prime examples of where this exploited labor was utilized. Slaves, often prisoners of war or those born into servitude, would have been tasked with the most arduous and dangerous jobs, quarrying stone in distant mountains, hauling heavy materials, digging tunnels through solid rock, and working in the confined, damp spaces of aqueduct channels during maintenance. Their lives were harsh, short, and largely unrecorded, a silent foundation supporting the grandeur of Rome. Alongside slaves, soldiers played a crucial role, particularly in the early Republic and during times of peace when legions were not engaged in warfare. Roman legions were not just fighting machines, they were also highly disciplined engineering units. They built roads, bridges, fortifications, and, yes, aqueducts. Their organizational skills, their ability to work in large, coordinated groups, and their readiness for demanding physical labor made them ideal for such large-scale construction. Imagine a legionnaire, fresh from campaign, now chipping away at a rock face instead of an enemy shield. It was a different kind of battle, but no less demanding. Then there were the freedmen and free laborers, often drawn from the urban poor. These individuals would have performed skilled and semi-skilled tasks. Masons, carpenters, plumbers, the plumbery we discussed earlier, and specialized foremen who oversaw various teams. While they had more autonomy than slaves, their work was still physically demanding, often dangerous, and paid meagerly. They lived hand-to-mouth, relying on consistent work from these public projects to survive in the bustling, competitive city. Imagine the precarious existence. knowing your livelihood depended on the emperor's next building whim. The conditions for these laborers were far from ideal. Accidents were common: rockfalls in quarries, collapses during tunneling, falls from scaffolding on high aqueduct arches. Disease, exacerbated by poor sanitation and crowded living conditions, would have swept through work camps. The work was relentless, often from dawn till dusk, under the scorching Roman sun or in damp, chilly underground channels. There were no safety regulations, no hard hats, and certainly no workers' compensation. Historians still argue about the exact composition and proportion of slave, soldier, and free labor on specific projects, as records are often incomplete or biased. However, it's clear it was a massive, mixed workforce. Consider the logistics of feeding, housing, and managing these vast numbers of people across miles of countryside and within the crowded city. It required immense organizational prowess, akin to running a small army solely for construction. Supplies of food, tools, and raw materials had to be constantly moved to the various work sites. This logistical feat alone is a testament to Roman administrative capacity, albeit one achieved on the backs of uncelebrated labor. Even after construction, the ongoing maintenance, the constant vigil against leaks, calcification, and damage, required a continuous, dedicated workforce. The Familia Aquaria, our team of waterkeepers, continued this unseen labor for centuries. They were the ones crawling into cramped tunnels to chip away mineral deposits, the ones endlessly patrolling the miles of aqueduct channels, often in remote areas. Their work was vital, but largely invisible to the ordinary Roman who simply expected the water to flow. So, when you admire the surviving arches of a Roman aqueduct or the intricate carvings of a public fountain, remember the silent, unacknowledged thousands who brought them to life. The beauty and utility of Rome's water systems, so beloved by its citizens, rested firmly on the stoic perseverance and often brutal exploitation of its unseen laborers. Their sweat, their strength, and their lives were the true mortar that held these magnificent structures together, allowing the emperors to boast and the citizens to drink freely. It's a sobering thought, isn't it? The grand narratives of history often forget the hands that built them. You've just considered the silent, immense human cost behind Rome's watery grandeur. Now, let's shift our perspective to something more intimate: how these very fountains, these enduring structures, serve as invaluable windows into the past, allowing us to understand the Romans better. For archaeologists and historians, studying Roman fountains offers far more than just insights into engineering. They are crucial clues, acting as fountains as historical records, revealing facets of daily life, political priorities, and even cultural values. Imagine an archaeologist sifting through the remains of an ancient Roman city. A broken piece of pottery might tell a small story, a mosaic fragment a larger one, but a public fountain, that's like hitting the jackpot. Its very existence, location, and design can reveal a wealth of information about the Roman world that built and cherished it. Found another broken spout. Looks like it depicts a particularly grumpy dolphin. Fascinating. Firstly, the location of a public fountain itself is a significant historical clue. In a city without widespread indoor plumbing, fountains were placed strategically to serve large populations. Their density and distribution can tell us about population patterns, the layout of neighborhoods, and even the social stratification of different areas. An area with numerous, grand fountains suggests a wealthy or densely populated district. while sparser distribution points to less developed or poorer areas. It's a map of ancient demographics etched in water. Secondly, the design and ornamentation of the fountains are rich cultural documents. As we discussed, the sculptures, reliefs, and inscriptions on fountains often depicted mythological figures, emperors, or civic achievements. These artistic choices weren't random. They reflected the prevailing religious beliefs, political ideologies, and aesthetic tastes of the era. A fountain dedicated to Neptune might indicate a maritime focus for the city, while one celebrating an emperor's victory served as public propaganda. They are tangible records of Roman self-perception and the messages they wished to convey to their citizens. Imagine learning about Roman mythology just by collecting your daily water. Thirdly, the material used in their construction provides insights into Roman trade networks and economic capabilities. The sourcing of marble from distant quarries, the use of lead from mines across the empire, and the prevalence of Roman concrete all speak to sophisticated supply chains and a robust economy capable of extracting and transporting vast quantities of raw materials. A sudden change in fountain materials might even signal economic hardship or shifting trade priorities. It's like finding a geological passport within the stones themselves. Perhaps most tellingly, the inscriptions on fountains and aqueducts are direct historical statements. These epigraphic records explicitly name the emperor or public official who commissioned the work, the aqueduct that supplied it, and sometimes even the purpose or dedication of the structure. They are direct, contemporary accounts, offering invaluable data about dating, patronage, and the bureaucratic systems in place. Frontinus's writings, for example, relied heavily on these records to map and understand Rome's water system. Historians still argue about the complete accuracy of some of these ancient inscriptions, as benefactors occasionally exaggerated their contributions, but they remain invaluable. Even the wear and tear on the fountains tells a story. The erosion on marble from centuries of flowing water, the repairs and patched up sections, the calcification inside pipes. These physical changes document the lifespan of the structures, the challenges of maintenance, and periods of neglect or renewed investment. An archaeologist can read the history of a fountain by examining its physical state, much like a geologist reads the layers of the earth. Moreover, the presence of associated archaeological finds around fountains can illuminate daily life. Fragments of pottery for water collection, discarded coins, perhaps offerings, or simply accidental drops, or even small tools suggest the kinds of activities that took place there. The areas around public fountains would have been bustling hubs, and the detritus left behind paints a vivid picture of human interaction. Imagine finding a child's lost toy next to a fountain basin, connecting you directly to a playful moment 2 millennia ago. Finally, the evolution of fountain design over time reflects changing architectural trends and technological advancements. Early fountains were simpler, purely utilitarian. Later ones became increasingly elaborate, culminating in the monumental imperial nymphia. Tracing these changes allows historians to chart the development of Roman aesthetics and hydraulic engineering. It's a visual timeline of innovation, all expressed through the medium of water. So, when historians and archaeologists study Roman public fountains, they're not just looking at pretty plumbing. They're decoding ancient messages, tracing economic networks, understanding social structures, and visualizing the vibrant daily lives of the people who gathered around them. These beloved gushing structures are, in a very real sense, living historical records, continuously whispering stories from the past if only we know how to listen. And that, my friends, is a truly refreshing thought. You've just discovered how fountains, those silent witnesses to history, whisper tales of Roman life. Now, as our journey through the watery world of ancient Rome draws to a close, let's step back and consider the overarching narrative. The story of Rome's love for its public fountains is, in essence, a testament to enduring Roman ingenuity. It's a tale of how a civilization, driven by necessity and ambition, transformed a basic resource into a defining feature of its urban life and a lasting symbol of its power and sophistication. Imagine the sheer audacity of it all. At a time when most cities struggled with rudimentary water supplies, the Romans conceived and executed a system of aqueducts and fountains that could sustain a metropolis of over 1 million people. They didn't just build, they innovated. They pioneered waterproof concrete, mastered the art of gravity-fed hydraulics, and designed distribution networks that, despite their occasional lead problem, were remarkably efficient for their era. This wasn't just practical engineering, it was visionary. You want water? We'll bring a mountain to you, and make it look fabulous while we're at it. Their ingenuity wasn't just about grand engineering feats. It permeated every aspect of their water management, from the meticulous surveying required to maintain precise gradients over miles, to the development of settling tanks to purify water, to the ingenious hypocaust system for heating baths. Every solution was a testament to their problem-solving prowess. They were relentless in their pursuit of practical excellence. Understanding that a thriving city required a meticulously managed environment, consider the societal impact of this ingenuity. The constant availability of clean water flowing freely from public fountains wasn't just a convenience. It enabled a level of urban hygiene and public health unprecedented in the ancient world. It supported a denser, more vibrant urban population, allowing Rome to flourish as an economic and cultural powerhouse. The baths, those grand extensions of the water system, fostered a unique communal culture that enriched the lives of citizens from all social strata. It's difficult to overstate how transformative this access to water truly was. Historians still argue about the precise degree to which Roman engineering advancements were entirely original or built upon earlier Greek and Etruscan knowledge, but their unparalleled scale and systematic application are undeniable. Moreover, the Romans understood the powerful psychological and aesthetic dimensions of their waterworks. The public fountains weren't just spouts, they were works of art, public declarations of wealth, power, and civic pride. They integrated beauty and utility seamlessly, understanding that an inspiring urban environment contributed to the well-being and loyalty of its citizens. The gurgling sound, the refreshing spray, the gleaming marble, all contributed to a sensory experience that made these fountains truly beloved. It was a holistic approach to urban planning, blending the practical with the poetic, even the challenges they faced, like the constant battle against calcification or the problem of illegal tapping, highlight their enduring ingenuity. They developed techniques for cleaning aqueduct channels, established bureaucratic structures to manage the system, and even attempted to regulate private consumption. These ongoing efforts, despite their imperfections, demonstrate a persistent commitment to maintaining their vital infrastructure. They were constantly learning, constantly adapting, trying to keep their watery heart beating. The legacy of Roman water mastery flows far beyond the ruins of their aqueducts. It influenced medieval monasteries, Renaissance city planning, and even modern hydraulics. The very idea of a centralized, managed urban water supply, taken for granted today, has its profound origins in Roman innovation. They set a standard, a benchmark for urban living that would not be consistently surpassed for well over a millennium. So, as we conclude this nocturnal journey, take a moment to reflect on the sheer brilliance and tenacious spirit of the ancient Romans. Their love for public fountains wasn't a whimsical affection. It was a deeply practical, aesthetically driven, and culturally ingrained appreciation for a system that was nothing short of miraculous. It was a testament to their ability to solve monumental problems, to create beauty out of necessity, and to build a civilization that, in many ways, literally flowed with life. The constant rush and murmur of those ancient fountains, long since silenced in many parts of the former empire, still echo in the fundamental principles of our own urban lives. They remind us that ingenuity, when applied to the most basic human needs, can create enduring wonders. And that, my friends, is a truly refreshing thought to take.